So I'd like to say a few words about the overall tectonic setting, the overall geological setting of the Canary Islands before we go into the details of the eruption. And the Canary Islands, well, it's an archipelago of 7 main islands, and the islands actually have different ages. The oldest islands are in the east, and they are quite flat. They're deeply eroded because they're so old. Wind and rain has taken them down. The central islands, they're a little bit more steep. There is Teide being at the height of evolution, and then we have the very young islands in the western part of the archipelago, La Palma and El Hierro. And we believe that the islands are fed by a stationary melting anomaly in the mantle, and the plate above this stationary anomaly is moving, and it's moving at a pretty slow rate, only about the speed with which your fingernail is growing, but over millions of years it will create a chain of islands. And the concept is very similar to what we see in Hawaii, but the plate under Hawaii is moving a lot faster, so the chain is more nicely spread out than here in the Canaries. So what we see is the older islands are deeply eroded, the younger islands are pretty steep, and once the island is really, or an island is really heavily grown, then we have something like Teide on Tenerife with 3,715 meters. It's the tallest mountain in all of Spain. But the fate of Teide is, with time it will be eroded as well, and the fate of La Palma and El Hierro is they will likely grow for a while longer before they will ultimately be taken down by wind and weather as well. So the heat anomaly that feeds this volcanism sits under La Palma and El Hierro at the moment, and this is where we also have eruptions. And La Palma had several eruptions in historical times. El Hierro had one just about 10 years ago, a submarine eruption. And the idea is that this heat anomaly, and I have a little video, let's see if I can make it work. Yes, so this heat anomaly that started off producing Fuerteventura and Lanzarote, and then Gran Canaria, and then Tenerife, it now sits under these islands, La Palma and El Hierro, and this is why we have a lot of eruptions in this part of the archipelago relative to the other islands. So, the geology of La Palma, very briefly, we have an old shield volcano, the Taburiente volcano, up in the north, and at about 500, 600,000 years ago, it collapsed. Part of it collapsed into the sea, and after that a new ridge grew, the Cumbre Vieja ridge. It's named the old ridge, but technically it's actually the young ridge, the new ridge. The term comes from forestry, it means the old forest, so it's a bit misleading at times, but we have 2 volcanoes, if you will, an old extinct one here and a young growing one to the south. And this has been growing for the last 200,000 years, and all volcanic activity on the island that we know of, that we have experienced in historical times, has occurred along the Cumbre Vieja ridge. So here's a little map, and here we have the recorded eruptions. There is the 1585 one, there's the 1712 one, the 1646 one, the 1667 one down here, and then we have the 1949 one, and there's one which is believed to have occurred in 1430, but it wasn't witnessed and recorded in the classical sense, so it's a speculative element there. And then of course we have the new one, the 2021 eruption, and all emanate along this ridge and produce lava flows that travel down to the sea, either to the west or the east. And here's an image from the 1949 eruption, an early photograph, and this is one from the 1971 eruption. Both look actually quite similar to what we have seen just last year in the 2021 eruption. So here's a little table of the historical eruptions in the Canary Islands, and half of all the historical eruptions in the Canary Islands happened along this ridge, along the Cumbre Vieja ridge. So most eruptions happen there, and this is the hot spot of volcanic activity in the Canary Islands overall. So what is this ridge made of? Well, there's these feeder dikes, as we call them. These are fractures that allow magma to rise up, and these fractures that guide the magma, they feed vents at the surface. And geologically, every so often, one of these fractures breaks through to the surface and produces a volcano, producing, for example, those here of 1585, 1646, 1712, and then, of course, the younger ones, 1949, 1971, and the latest one just last year.